The term i'tikaf in the Arabic language literally means to stick. Actually, it's derived from base letters ayn, ta, fa. Actually, ayn, kaf, fa. And ayn, kaf, and fa basically contain the meaning of sticking to something. This verb form, when you put it in this form, i'tikaf, it means to reflect that meaning. It's the reflexive form. So it means to stick oneself to something. So now remember that the base letter is meant to stick, but when you put it in this particular verb form, then it means to reflect that meaning onto yourself. So it means to stick yourself to something. That's the literal meaning. Legally in the Sharia, it refers to an act in which an individual sticks themselves within the masjid. And spiritually, it refers to an individual sticking themselves to the door of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knocking until He lets them in. So this is what is i'tikaf. Now i'tikaf actually is a very powerful deed. I will tell you that the deen is embedded in i'tikaf. The deen is embedded in i'tikaf, and actually i'tikaf is one of the earliest sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. Now when I say that the deen is embedded in i'tikaf and that it's one of the earliest sunnahs, I mean that actually it forms the foundation from which the deen actually grows. Because if you think about it, the entire origin of the deen lies in the i'tikaf of the Prophet ﷺ. Now we all know that somewhere in these last 10 days of Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ was blessed with the initial revelations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that happened in Laylatul Qadr. And Laylatul Qadr, we feel, according to the vast majority of scholars, occurs in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Now what's special about Laylatul Qadr? Several things. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ, well, number one, the entire Quran was revealed from the highest heaven to the lowest heaven. And then from the lowest heaven, a portion of the Quran was revealed to the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. And then with that, the Prophet ﷺ was crowned his prophethood. Previously, he was unrevealed. Once he received that revelation, he became the Prophet ﷺ. And then finally, the birth of Islam. Now all of that, which really forms the essence of the deen, which forms the main foundation of the deen, came out of what? Came out of a man secluding himself, sticking himself in a cave for days on end until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened the door to his reality. Now what is that? That's i'tikaf. It's not the i'tikaf that we do where we spend 10 days in the masjid and we have certain legal rulings, but in essence, the history of the deen, the spirit of the deen, the basis of the deen actually arose from this act of worship. Which is that the Prophet ﷺ initially, at the very beginning of this deen, used to take himself and seclude himself and isolate himself in that cave until the very first revelation was revealed, and then from that obviously the sprouts of the deen arose. So actually the essence of i'tikaf, the power of i'tikaf, the basis of i'tikaf takes you all the way back to the origin of the deen. So it's a very powerful act. Now, it's so powerful that not only did the deen arise from it, but the Prophet ﷺ was extremely particular about it. In fact, we know from hadith that once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Ramadan upon this ummah, which basically happened after the hijrah, 18 months after the hijrah to be exact. Once the fasting of Ramadan was revealed upon this ummah, the Prophet ﷺ spent 10 days in i'tikaf every single year. Every year of his life, the Prophet ﷺ spent 10 days doing i'tikaf. There were two exceptions. In one year, the Prophet ﷺ fell ill during the last 10 days. And so he missed the i'tikaf. Now the general principle of a sunnah is that when a sunnah is missed, it's not made up. For example, if you miss the sunnah of Dhuhr, you don't make it up. Right? If you miss the sunnah of Asr, you don't make it up. And in this particular instance, although i'tikaf is a sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ the subsequent year actually made it up. and instead he performed 20 days of i'tikaf. So that's the one exception. And then the Prophet ﷺ continued along with his habit of 10 days until the very last year of his life on this earth, or in this worldly life, in which case he actually did 20 days as well. So you'll see that for the vast majority of the time, the Prophet ﷺ was very attentive to this particular act. Now, when you think about i'tikaf, the ulama actually subclassify i'tikaf into 3 subtypes. So if you look at the Sharia, the ulama, they divide i'tikaf into 3 types. The first type is wajib. When i'tikaf is wajib. Now when does that occur? The only way that i'tikaf can become wajib, which means necessary, is that an individual say that I swear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I become better, let's say the person is sick, if I become better, then I will do 2 days of i'tikaf. In that case, those 2 days of i'tikaf become wajib on the individual, and he has to fulfill it because he took an oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's classified as a wajib i'tikaf. The second type of i'tikaf is the sunnah i'tikaf. The sunnah i'tikaf is exactly as I've described. The Prophet ﷺ spent the last 10 days of Ramadan, almost every single year of his life, secluding himself in the masjid and not leaving unless there was necessity. So that forms the basis of the sunnah i'tikaf. And an individual who intends to perform the sunnah i'tikaf walks in the door and makes the intention, silently or verbally, that I will be performing 10 days of sunnah i'tikaf, and then they confine themselves to the masjid for that 10-day period. So that is the sunnah i'tikaf. The third type of i'tikaf is a nafil i'tikaf, supererogatory i'tikaf. Now in this particular issue there is debate amongst our scholars. What is the minimal amount of time that an individual can spend in the masjid to call himself someone who is performing i'tikaf? This our scholars debate. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh was of the opinion that the minimal amount of time that a person can spend in i'tikaf is 1 day. If an individual wants to perform i'tikaf on a supererogatory basis, the minimal niyyah that they can have according to Imam Abu Hanifa is 1 day. In which case an individual would walk in the door, they would make a decision that they would come in, let's say before Maghrib of the 27th of Ramadan, they would spend the entire day up until Maghrib of the 28th of Ramadan in the masjid, and they would have fulfilled a supererogatory i'tikaf for 1 day. This was the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah alayh, which was a famous student of Imam Abu Hanifa, actually had a different opinion. His opinion was that even 1 moment with the intention of an individual turning away from the life of this world and focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sticking their attention to Allah, sticking their focus to Allah, sticking their heart towards Allah, even just that moment would fulfill the intention of i'tikaf and the rewards associated with it. And actually that is the mufta bihi qawl. Now when we say mufta bihi, it means that the ulama, they review all of the different proofs of each scholar, and then they basically come up with what they feel is the fatwa. Meaning if they had to write an official answer, what would they write? And so the mufta bihi qawl is actually on Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah alayh's opinion. So that even a single moment spent in the masjid with the niyyah of i'tikaf provides tremendous reward. So each of you have to basically look at the i'tikaf and make your niyyah accordingly. Some of you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the supreme tawfiq. It's a big deal in this day and age. To leave your work, to leave your responsibilities, to leave your families, etc. and to make the niyyah to spend 10 days here. So for you, you make a 10-day niyyah, and you will have to remain in the masjid for that 10 days straight. Other people have less time available to them. So my recommendation in that case would be that you make a day-to-day niyyah, so that you fulfill basically Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf's opinion. So what you would do is you would come in at Maghrib on Saturday, stay all the way until Maghrib on Sunday, and make your niyyah to fulfill that 1 day. And for those people who have the need to go in and out, they're more than welcome to come in and out as they please, with the exception of late night, in which case the doors will be locked, and I'll talk about those rules in a minute. But for those people who have limited time, then basically your niyyah will be that I am making nafil i'tikaf. Now, once you make the niyyah of i'tikaf, you have to recognize what actually i'tikaf is. And this is actually where the misunderstandings begin to arise. Spiritually, or let's just say figuratively, if you just want to think about i'tikaf, the way you think about i'tikaf is that i'tikaf is a clinic. It's not a clinic, it's like a medical ward. What happens in i'tikaf is that an individual recognizes deficiencies within themselves and says, I need some time to rectify those deficiencies, and I need to do it in the most extreme way. So what do? They cut themselves off from everything, and they admit themselves to the clinic. And you know, there's people who are out there in the world who are addicted to drugs. What happens? Their life goes down the tubes. But one day, somehow, out of nowhere, they begin to realize that, wait a minute, I need help. So what do? They then go to a drug rehab center and they check themselves in. Now when they check themselves in, they then get cut off from everything around them. They're not allowed to even leave the center. And they begin to live life according to a normal schedule so that that normalcy can be embedded within them so that when they check out of the clinic, they can survive the real world experience. Some people check into the clinic for a day. Within one day, they're clean. Some people check in for the clinic for 2 weeks. Some people need to check in for to the clinic for a year. It's not based on the time, it's based on the result. They make the intention that I will check into this clinic and I'm not checking out until I'm ready to check out. That's actually what i'tikaf is all about. Basically, what happens in i'tikaf is that an individual recognizes that there are deficiencies within them and their relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they come here and they check in. Now when an individual checks in, just as when they go to a clinic there are certain rules, in the same way, in this clinic there are certain rules. And so that's what I want to go through for the next few minutes. Now actually you can subdivide the rules. The first set of rules are the shar'i rules, the legal rules. Those rules which basically define the i'tikaf, and if you break them, you broke the i'tikaf. And it's very simple. The only legal rule to perpetuate an individual's i'tikaf is that they remain within the masjid. Alright, now that raises some important issues. Number one, what is masjid? Okay, masjid is defined as a particular area. The whole building is not masjid. Okay, the parking lot is not masjid. People always like to say, and they'll come to me regularly every year, brother, the whole building is masjid. So why do you keep saying this room is masjid and that room is not masjid? The whole building is not masjid. If you call the whole building masjid, it means we use the washroom in the masjid. Because there's washrooms in this building too. So you're telling me that we all are using the washroom in the masjid? Obviously, that part is not considered masjid. So actually, it's the responsibility of the management of a particular location where people pray to define what they want to be masjid. Okay? And so the management actually has defined the masjid in this particular institution as being basically 3 accessible rooms and a 4th room if it needs to be accessible. Okay? It's this major prayer hall here, the boundary of which ends at the door over there. That is the boundary of the masjid. Alright? It's the women's prayer hall as well, the boundary of which ends at the cafeteria, eating area. And then it's this 3rd corner room here, which sort of is a joint area which is used for both the sisters and the brothers, but basically during these 10 days it's pretty much used for the brothers. Alright, with the perhaps exception of the 27th night. But basically, these 3 areas define masjid. The person who is in i'tikaf is free to enter any of these 3 rooms and the library if the need arises, because that falls within the boundary. But they are not allowed to cross the border outside of the masjid. If an individual does so, intentionally, unintentionally, without legal permission, their i'tikaf breaks. Doesn't matter if you didn't intend it, you intended it, doesn't make a difference. Now what do I mean by legal permission? So the only permission to leave the masjid is necessity. And necessity is defined as, number one, needing to use the washroom. Alright? Number two, needing to make wudu. And number three, needing to make ghusl. Now when I say needing to use the washroom, it's not your personal need. Alright? It means needing to relieve yourself, not needing to go and look at yourself in the mirror, or needing to go and comb your hair, or needing to go and wash your hands because you just ate. That's not necessity. Necessity means to relieve yourself. Alright? Number two, to make wudu. And number three, to make ghusl. Only in necessity. And the only necessity for ghusl is major ritual impurity, in which case you're forced out of the masjid by law, right? And then you have to go and make a ghusl. So Jummah is not a necessity. My back itches is not a necessity. My hair itches is not a necessity. These things do not fall under necessity. So this is the legal necessity that defines the right to leave the masjid. So basically, once you make the intention for the Itikaf, you are in this building, and nothing else exists except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your relationship with Him. And the times you have to leave, you'll leave. Now, there is one other instance in which you would have permission to leave, and that would be if there was no food available. And that would be then if nobody could bring you food, then in that case you might be able to leave. But in this case we have a setup which has been working well for several years in a row, in which case the people in Itikaf that eat in this back room. Now, you have to recognize that if you're in Itikaf, you need to eat in that back room. And if you're not in Itikaf, you need to recognize that there are people in Itikaf who need to eat in that back room. The food's the same. It always looks better in the back room. That much I can tell you. But it's always the same. Whatever food's in this back room is also present in the cafeteria. So those people in Itikaf, they need to wait. And if it means doing 2 shifts, we'll do 2 shifts. And those people not in Itikaf, if they could respect the fact that the food is the same and eat in the room next to the masjid, which is basically the cafeteria, that would be greatly appreciated as well. So that basically defines the masjid and the rulings for the Itikaf. Now, at the same time, aside from legal rules, as a group of individuals, as we get together and we try to stay in this masjid, we have created certain rules for the benefit of one another. Obviously, when a group of people sit together, they need to interact with one another, and there are certain rights and respect that we should have for one another that would make this gathering much more beneficial for everyone who attends. And so I want to go through some of those rules right now. The first is that if you're here for Itikaf, let's say you're here for 3 days or 4 days or 10 days, I would request that you not have your car parked in the parking lot of the masjid. Now you'll see when you came in, if you happen to park there, that the parking lot is fairly small. You're talking about maybe 15, 20 cars maximum. And there are people who obviously are going to be coming to the masjid daily, or perhaps several times in the day, and for them it becomes very inconvenient to have to park far away when there's a car sitting in one spot that's going to sit there for 10 days straight. So there are other options for parking. Now obviously if you're in Itikaf you can't leave, but we can send people. You can tell me, you can come and talk to me, or come and talk to the management. Let us know that your car is parked in one of the spots. We can take your keys, we can send someone, and we can park the car on the street so that the masjid parking lot remains free. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that obviously the demands during Itikaf on the masjid are much higher. Today we have some people, as you'll see as we go through the week, it'll peak at about the 27th. The last weekend actually several people are coming from out of town, so we'll probably remain at that peak. But the masjid undergoes heavy duty usage during these 10 days. It's almost as if a year's worth of time passes. You'll see, you yourself will feel like a year's worth of time is passing. You just sort of, everything disappears and you're only just stuck in the masjid. And at the same time, the masjid receives a lot of wear and tear during these days. So you need to respect the fact that the masjid is receiving that wear and tear. For example, if you look at the sinks are embedded in the walls, all right? But they're not actually bolted down firmly into some sort of pillar. They're just embedded and they can easily be torn off if you were to pull hard on them. So the problem that arises is that people make wudu, people are basically, they have their foot in the sink, they're hanging from it, their body weight is hanging from that sink, it tends to drag it down, and actually we've had a couple sinks, or at least one that I know of, actually be pulled off the wall. So we need to be a little bit careful. Now there are bars that are located near the sinks, and you can grab onto that bar so that your body weight is actually on that bar instead of the sink when you make wudu. Now I can't sit here and literally go through each and every one of these tiny things. What I'm trying to do is to highlight to you that you need to recognize that we're not in our home. This is not my home or your home, this is Allah's home. And everybody has to come and use Allah's home. We're guests here. And just as when you're a guest in someone's home, you're particularly careful about wiping up the sink when you're done using the washroom, flushing the toilet when you're done using the toilet, keeping things clean because it's not your home. In the same way, I think we need to all recognize that we are guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His home. If you keep that much in mind, then everything else becomes evident. If you walk around recognizing that, then you'll realize that we need to pick up things when we see them on the carpet. We need to respect the fact that there are individuals that are assigned to clean, and when they need to vacuum, we need to move our things, etc. And these things will be repeated as we move throughout the week. But basically what I want to highlight to you is to recognize the general theme that everybody needs to use this place, and so we should be particularly respectful about how we use it. Now, in particular, one of the issues that I'd like to raise, and it's more for the people who are coming in and out than it is for the people who are doing Itikaf, is that we should be respectful of the walkway into the masjid. Now what tends to happen is that people come into the masjid in a rush, so they take off their shoes and they leave them in the pathway. Now when they're left in the pathway, people are tripping over them, people are bringing in the dirt that was on the shoes further into the masjid, etc. The masjid administration has taken particular care to set up shoe racks, and it's a strong request that everyone put their shoe in a shoe rack when they come in. If not, you can have someone do it for you. Someone will go up there and do it for you. That's fine. But, I mean, why do another person should not be our servant. It's just a very simple organizational issue to recognize that I'm not the king of this home. This is not my home. I cannot just throw my shoes anywhere. This is Allah's home. I'm coming as a guest. I should come with some adab. I should take my shoes off and put them where they belong, because it's Allah's blessing that I'm coming here. So I would be, again, all falling under the same theme, is that to recognize that this is Allah's home and that we should respect Allah's home, and to recognize that other people are also coming to Allah's home, and so we should respect that they're here. So I went over the legal rules of Itikaf. Then I went over the basic rules for the masjid, which will be repeated as we move throughout the Itikaf. And then finally I want to talk about some of the rules for success in Itikaf. Now, any deed has two components. One is to do it, and the other is to be successful at it. And they're very different. I mean, how many of you have decided that you're going to go to college? So you go to college. Going to college is not the big thing. It's being successful in college that's the tough thing. So many of you may have decided to do Itikaf. SubhanAllah, that is a big thing, because the niyyah is rewarded in the deen. Actually, now once you're in Itikaf, now we're not going to sit and talk about being in Itikaf. Now the issue is, how do I succeed in Itikaf? So actually, this perhaps is the most important part of the discussion. Basically, there are a few very general principles that, if you keep in mind, will not only allow you to succeed in Itikaf, but they'll allow you to succeed in your general approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first is to decrease your sleep. Alright, now, we've come here, and we have a very limited period of time. These 10 days are going to fly. I will tell you right now, it will just fly. Fast after fast after fast will come, the 27th night will come, the weekend will come, and we'll be looking for the moon, and the Itikaf will end. In fact, I put down my bag, I felt like I was just here. That's how fast time flies. You just think about last year's Itikaf, and it's sort of like it just happened. So, time is going to fly. And for you, you have basically two goals. Number one, crush your nafs. And number two, grow your soul. There's only two things you have to do in this Itikaf. Number one, crush your nafs. And number two, grow your soul. How are you going to crush your nafs? By decreasing your sleep. The nafs loves to sleep. And how are you going to grow your soul? By increasing your acts of ibadah, which you're going to do when you're awake. So the first principle for the Itikaf is that you should decrease your sleep. That's the number one principle. Number two principle, decrease your speech. And I'll tell you that if you can fulfill this principle, your i'tikaf will be successful. You can actually sleep the whole i'tikaf. But if you can fulfill this one principle, this actually is the pinnacle of success. And that's to decrease your speech. Look, we've checked in, right? Now let me tell you one thing that I've noticed. I have some experience with people who check in, not for drugs, but for chemotherapy and these types of things, right? So when they check in, one thing that I've noticed when a patient checks in, they never ask you, why is he here? Why is the person in that room here? Why is the person in that room? They don't care. They don't care. They never say, oh, room 625, what is that person doing here? Room 621, I wonder what sickness they have. They're only worried about their own sickness. They want to talk to you every day about their sickness. Doctor, am I doing better? Doctor, how do things look? How does my future look? Is the chemotherapy working? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Do you have any other recommendations for me? They're only worried about themselves. So if you have checked into this clinic, where the issue is not your body, but is your soul and your relationship with Allah, then what reason is there to worry about what other people are doing? You don't need to ask the person next to you, what are you reading, what are you reciting, where did you come from, etc. Basically, it's you and Allah. I'tikaf, actually, one i'tikaf is to bring yourself into the masjid. And then you stuck yourself to the masjid. But the actual i'tikaf is then to find your corner and stick yourself to Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that actually is the essence of i'tikaf. That's what the Prophet ﷺ used to do. Actually, if you go to the i'tikaf of the Prophet ﷺ, he would be in a tent. He would wall himself actually even off from the Sahaba. And then on occasion he would interact with the Sahaba, but basically the Prophet ﷺ was even isolated from the people in i'tikaf with him. So that is the essence of i'tikaf. That is what you could say is actually the greatest spiritual dimension of i'tikaf, is to basically say to yourself, I am going to stick myself, my focus, my attention, my desires, my dreams, etc. towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will result in your speech. And I will tell you one thing that my teachers used to tell me about i'tikaf. And that is that consider speaking to anybody else in i'tikaf, just consider it haram. No, it's not haram, but consider it haram. In your mind, just as you would not do something haram, consider speaking exactly as that. So you just want to decrease speech altogether. The next thing you want to decrease is your food. Alright? Basically, shaitan runs through the blood of every human being. It's in hadith. And the way you're going to kill shaitan is by cutting off your food. Now it's very interesting. When we give chemotherapy, right, there's principles of chemotherapy. I'll teach you one principle. When they give chemotherapy, what they're doing is killing the whole body. Actually, the chemotherapy trashes the whole body from head to toe. But the idea is that the cancer is more likely to die by the chemotherapy because it's turning over, as opposed to the normal body cells. So they give chemotherapy not because they're only attacking the cancer. Actually, they wipe out the whole body. And anybody who has any experience with a chemotherapy patient knows they start throwing up, their hair starts falling out, they start feeling horrible, because actually they're poisoning themselves. But the point is that the poison preferentially kills the cancer because the cancer is duplicating at a faster rate than the rest of the body. All right? So this actually is the principle of chemotherapy, that they kill off the whole body, but preferentially that destroys the cancer. Same thing with fasting. Actually, what happens in fasting is that the entire body gets starved, but what happens preferentially is that shaitan loses his conduit, the blood. The Prophet ﷺ told us that shaitan floats through the blood of a human being. But when we starve the body, shaitan loses that conduit. So, fasting is not the name of 3 meals replaced at different times. Right? It's ironic. In Ramadan, we eat more than we eat outside of Ramadan. And in Ramadan, we eat foods that we don't even see outside of Ramadan. We would not even think about a particular food outside of Ramadan. And in Ramadan, it's an expectation, it's a demand that I'm going to eat that food. At suhoor, I have to have my samosas, pakora, etc. Right? And you would not even expect to get that at Maghrib time on any other day outside of Ramadan. So you have to think about what is the essence of this fast. Right? And what is the benefit that lies in the fast. Now if you take the 3 meals, And instead of eating them at 8 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and 7 o'clock in the evening, instead you eat one at 4 in the morning, you eat the next one at 6, and you eat the next one at midnight, you're basically fulfilling the same thing. You fulfilled the legal aspect of the fast, but you lost out on the spiritual dimension of the fast. Alright? So you really want to decrease expectations. Now, obviously in Itikaf there are expectations, right? Because the food tends to be a little good in Itikaf. Everybody knows that. But I would really work on decreasing my intake. And it's only for our own good. We're basically patients here. We admitted ourselves and we have a desire to change. So take advantage of these days. Because these days they don't come. Believe me, they don't come. I will tell you, many, many people intended to be here. Right? As I'm coming here, driving here, I myself even barely made it here. You know, you never know next year whether you're going to be here or not. There were people who intended to be here, they took off the time, they bought their tickets if they were coming from out of town, some of them, and all of a sudden someone fell ill, they couldn't come. There were other people, they needed to come, their wife's relative fell ill, they couldn't come. So you never know when you're going to be here. You never know when Allah grants you these days, and Allah's granting you these days is a huge gift. Look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very extreme in His mercy. And I will tell you one general principle that's important for you to recognize concerning Allah's mercy. Allah does not bring someone to send them home empty-handed. Allah does not bring someone to send them home empty-handed. The mere fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even put in your idea that I should come for, in your head the idea that I should come for Itikaf, I should spend time in Itikaf, I should come seclude myself in the masjid, that is a very, very rare thought in this day and age. Many people don't even know what the word Itikaf means. Forget about having the idea of coming and organizing your schedule to be here. So, take advantage of these days. The fact that Allah sent you here is inshallah a sign that Allah will send you back with something as well. And that's actually what it's all about. If you can leave this place having gained some nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then our goals are fulfilled. Now in order to be conducive towards the goals that we have set out for this Itikaf, there is a schedule that we've established. And I want to briefly run that schedule so that you can recognize what is required for the people who are here for Itikaf. The schedule basically is as follows. Number one, we'll basically wake up a little bit before the Fajr prayer, before the time for Suhoor, and there will be Qiyam al-Layl. Basically, one brother will step out of the Tarawih prayer and will lead the entire group. He will be praying his Tarawih. Everybody will pray behind him with the niyyah of a nafil salah. That happens, I don't know what time it's going to be. So what's the time now for Suhoor? Like 5:30. So basically 4 o'clock. Yeah. So 4 o'clock will be Qiyam al-Layl. So you will be basically woken up at about a little bit before 4 o'clock. You'll be able to make wudu, and then we'll begin Qiyam al-Layl. And we pray usually 8 rak'ah in that Qiyam al-Layl. During that time, your suhoor will be prepared for you. You don't even need to worry about it. Okay? But if you are not in Itikaf, I would request that you pick one day and come and try to help out in preparing the suhoor. You'll get the reward, inshallah, of readying food for the fasters, and it will benefit the people. It will end up benefiting the people in Itikaf because we can't leave. At iftar time, it's loaded. Everybody's coming to help. But suhoor time's a little bit strange. 3 in the morning, it's tough for people to show up at the masjid. So if you have that ability and you can come here at 3 in the morning, maybe pick 1 or 2 days, talk to the management and try to create a schedule so that you can help out and prepare because there's fewer people helping out at that time. Okay? So that's basically what happens at 4 in the morning. Now we'll then continue on. After that we'll have the suhoor, and then after the suhoor we will call the adhan, and per routine the Fajr prayer is 30 minutes after the suhoor time. Exactly. So the Fajr adhan will be called, we'll pray the sunnahs, you'll have some time for your personal worship, and then we'll pray the Fajr prayer. After the Fajr prayer occurs, there will be a talk. That talk will last all the way up until Ishraq. Now, basically there are 3 major talks, 2 major talks and 1 minor talk in the day. The first major talk is after the Fajr prayer, All right. The second major talk is at this time after the tarawih prayer, and the third talk, which will occur on some nights but not all nights, is right before everyone closes. We turn off the lights, which is about midnight, and that's just a short 10-minute reminder type of talk. Basically, it's like a nasiha talk. All right. For the most part, the talks will be focused around a topic. Every year, if you've been here before, you know we focus on a topic. 3 years ago we did Tahara, 2 years ago we did Salah, last year we did fasting. This year's topic is Hajj. Alright? So there will be almost, if I recall correctly, 14 lectures on Hajj. Now, these lectures are going to be covering Umrah, covering Hajj, covering historical aspects of Hajj, and covering some of the mosques that are visited and sites that are visited and historical aspects concerning those sites. So it's going to be a very detailed discussion. Part of that will also include some projections so that people can understand where everything is located in the Hajj, how to make the tawaf, how to make the sa'i, etc. And we'll talk about those things when we get there. But that's the topic for this 10-day period is Hajj and different aspects concerning the Hajj. Now, usually in the past, it's been that I've given most of the talks when I wasn't here, then some other people have given the talks. But actually, this year it'll be a little bit different. I will give many of the talks, but we will have other people giving the talks as well. So I'm hopeful that some ulama will come from outside. We have some people also within the Itikaf who are also qualified. So these talks will actually be divided out. My talks will be Hajj. The other people will talk on whatever topic they decide that they want to talk on. But there will be a little bit of variety, inshallah, for this year. So that will be after the Fajr prayer. The talk will go all the way until the Ishraq. Ishraq prayer will be then 2 rakahs, which is rewarded according to hadith, the reward of a Hajj and an Umrah. So we'll pray that. And afterwards, then everyone will be able to have time for their personal worship or for sleeping. Most people basically take that time to take rest because you've been up since 3 in the morning. So you'll have time to rest all the way until the Zawal, right before Dhuhr. The Dhuhr Adhan will be called. People will try to wake up people a little bit earlier because obviously there's a line for wudu, which then brings up the other issue. When you make wudu, please make wudu quickly and please use the washroom efficiently because obviously you can see that it's a lot of people who are going to be in line and it just makes things a little bit difficult if we're not receptive to the fact that there are many other people waiting. So then we'll pray the Dhuhr prayer. After the Dhuhr prayer, Dhuhr to Asr is basically personal worship. Most people recite Quran during that time. After the Asr prayer, we usually do our silent group dhikr for 20 minutes, after which is personal worship time all the way until Maghrib. And then, again, Maghrib to Isha is personal worship time. And then, obviously, after Isha is the Tarawih prayer. That's the rough schedule. You don't need to necessarily write anything down, but you'll see that this will become the routine over these next 10 days. Now, recognize that the schedule is designed purposely so that you can develop. And so I highly recommend that you use this schedule to your advantage. If you try to stay awake at the times when people are sleeping, you're going to end up sleeping at the times when you should be awake. So what happens? You come to the talk, you're falling asleep, right? Or you're falling asleep in the Tarawih prayer. Or you're falling asleep at times when you shouldn't be sleeping, like sleeping through a prayer, which is a really bad thing to be doing, obviously, in Itikaf. So I think you need to recognize that the schedule is designed and it works. We've been doing it for now, this is 3, 4, 5 years now. We know that the schedule works. We have experience with the schedule. So I would really recommend that you follow the schedule. Put yourself on the schedule. The first day is tough. You may not feel like sleeping. Put yourself in your sleeping bag. You'll fall asleep. Once you get on the routine, then you'll see that, inshallah, there's a lot of barakah in that routine. So I'm recommending following the schedule. And the final thing is, obviously, during these free times and these personal times, you should increase your acts of worship. Increase your recitation of the Quran. Increase the length of your salah. Even if you don't know very many surahs, recite Qul Huwallahu Ahad 20 times. Make that a long prayer. But take advantage of this time to increase your acts of worship. If you're so lazy and you don't want to do any act of worship, just sit quietly and face the Qibla. Even that is a worship. And if you can't even do that, just lie down and go to sleep. Even that is a worship. But don't get engaged in talking to other people and worrying about what's going on in the outside world. Believe me, the outside world will be exactly the same when you go there. The question is, are you going to be different or not? The world is going to run around the same way it runs around. There's going to be world crises, there's going to be UN meetings, okay? All these things happen all the time. You'll die, they'll happen. You're alive, they'll happen. You're in Itikaf, they'll happen. You're outside, they'll happen. Nothing changes. It's about you. These days are about you. Are you going to change in these next 10 days? Right? That's the real question, and that's what we come here, right? That's why we're aqifuna fil masajid. We're stuck in this masjid begging that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes. So use your time wisely. It's your time. It's about you. No one else is going to change based on what you do. It's up to you. So with that, basically I want to close this session. So inshallah then until later on, wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.